Hey there, I'm Brock with Keep Alberta Rolling, and today it is my great honor to be here with Mr. Kyle Edward Ball, the director and writer of Skinamarink. So, um, Kyle, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your career as a filmmaker in Edmonton leading up to this smash hit?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Kyle Eberball. I'm the writer, director, and editor of Skinamarink. I've been adding editor recently because I was at a screening and this person said it's you should bring up that you edited it too. Um, so here's my career in a nutshell. I went to film school in my early 20s at NAIT, the Northern Alberta Institute of Technology. Took the digital cinema program there. Then I briefly moonlighted for a music video director in Edmonton. There was two projects I was involved in. Those went absolutely nowhere. Then based on that whole experience out of film school, I was somewhat disenchanted. I did a handful of short films, horror shorts, trying to mimic the success of a horror short that went viral around the time called Lights Out. The problem was everyone and their grandma was making a horror short after Lights Out. And also, I was making videos that I thought others wanted to see instead of making videos that I thought I would like to make. Um, so then one day I thought, hey, what if I did a YouTube channel where people just commented nightmares they've had and I recreate them? And that way I don't have to come up with a new concept each week or each month. I just have to worry about showing it in a certain way. And so the first video I did was a nightmare I had, and then slowly people would comment other nightmares they had, and my channel grew a little bit over time. It was an excellent sandbox because I was able to learn how to film stuff and make it scary, learn what I was good at, learn what I was bad at, and learn what I liked to show on screen and how I like to show it. So I slowly leaned into kind of a lo-fi 1960s, 70s retro look, and congruent with this, the so-called analog horror space on YouTube was building steam. Um, so after doing that for a few years, I decided, okay, I should maybe look into doing a feature. So I did a proof of concept short called Heck. Um, that was kind of a vague idea for a feature that I had. I always intended the proof of concept to be something that would help make the feature, but something that could still kind of stand alone as its own piece. So there are themes and ideas in the short film Heck that are not explored in Skinamarink and vice versa. Um, Once I made that short, it didn't get a huge response, although it's had, interestingly enough, kind of a renaissance since the release of Skinamarink. So it didn't have quite a response. It really didn't get into any film festivals outside of this, like, kind of online only festival in Portland. Um, I think a big reason why I didn't get into any festivals though was because it was 30 minutes long and incredibly hard to program for a short film. Um, Regardless, I was happy with how it turned out, and I really liked how it felt and sounded, and I thought, okay, maybe I can do a feature. Then the pandemic happened. Um, I was laid off from my job. temporarily. Then I was brought back to my job. Then I was laid off again. Um, and I thought, okay, I'm laid off. I have some free time. Lemons, lemonade. Maybe I can use this as an opportunity to make my feature now or never kind of situation. So I got to work writing the script for the feature. Then once the script was partial, like basically finished, I went into applying for I went into development. My executive producer, Edmon Rotea, who was not the executive producer at the time, he was just my friend. He had won in some sort of contest a $500 development fund from Ampia. And he just messaged our little group chat and said, "Hey guys, does anyone have anything they'd like to apply this $500 development fund? I don't have any projects, blah blah blah." They said, "I'll take it," right? So that was our first little amount of funding. We used that $500 to set up grant proposals for a handful of grants in Alberta. We applied for the grants. Unfortunately, we didn't get the grants. But the good thing about that was when we had done our grant proposals, we had this long, comprehensive amount of materials that we could transfer to a crowd fund fairly easily. So detailed synopsis, storyboards, blah, blah, all this stuff. So we just went to crowd fund. We set a goal of $15,000. We did it through an excellent crowdfunder called Seed and Spark. If you're a filmmaker, as far as I'm concerned, there's only one crowdfunder you should look into, and that's Seed and Spark. It's filmmaker only, so it's only for video. I think they do some other stuff too, is like maybe video games and stuff, but basically it's a cinema specific, video specific crowdfunder. They're amazing. When before you launch your crowdfund, you send it to them for critique, and they give you really honest but really good feedback based on your crowdfund, and then like they're amazing. They also, I believe, take the lowest amount of cut compared to other crowdfunders like Indiegogo. Also, they are really supportive throughout the crowdfunding campaign. Um, so we had raised, I think, about $11,000 cash, and the rest was in kind, which is another great thing about Seed and Spark too. They allow like a certain amount of in kind funding. So my executive producer had donated some hard drives and stuff as in kind. The actors had donated some of their like actors fee as in kind, but like originally when I did the crowd fund, I set like this exorbitant fee for the actors uh acting fee. So I set like 2,000, I think like $2,000 for each actor, because like I had never really cast something professionally before, and I didn't know if like we'd need to like fly like professional child actors in from Vancouver or something, right? Even though like from the get-go it was like you're only going to be there for a day, if that, like basically a short film's worth of acting. So we had finished the crowd fund. We had successfully raised both in kind and cash value for $15,000. Another important thing too was from the get-go, before I even started writing the script, through my YouTube series, I had learned how to shoot and tell a story for next to nothing. And when I went to write the script, I had in my mind, this is how you keep things cheap. So number one, we only have one location. Number two, I had developed this style in my YouTube series of not really showing the actors that much. And even when I wrote the script, I said, okay, we'll see the actors, but we never see their face. So we don't have to worry about things like makeup and continuity. Um, all their dialogue is delivered off screen. So we can just record it after the fact in ADR, which we did. Um, so we crowdfunded, then congruent with the crowdfund, we had already started pre-production. So shooting schedule, shot list, locating props and everything, equipment. My director of photography works for Fava and had accrued like basically years and years of rental credit that he hadn't really taken advantage of. So this was something that we could take advantage for it. So we were able to use tons of Fava equipment for basically free because my DOP had tons of rental credit.
Who was your
Although,
who was your DOP? Was it Andrew or who?
no, Jamie McRae.
Oh, Jamie. Okay, cool.
Yeah, who was reticent to sign on as a DOP because he's not really a DOP. He's a like experimental filmmaker like me. But I showed him the script and I explained to him what I wanted to do with the movie visually. And then the more I talked with him, the more we talked kind of one mind. Like he had the same point of references as far as Reddit. So the weird core aesthetic, liminal spaces, all that stuff. And he got kind of more excited about it. Um, in a weird way, the movie keeps coming. Reddit is a trending theme throughout my career. So my YouTube channel didn't really pick up till I started posting it to Reddit. And then that's like how I got my first 100 subscribers. That's how I got more and more steam. And then when me and Jamie were talking about the movie, all our references were to these obscure Reddits like weird core r slash weird core r slash liminal spaces r slash cursed images. And it even kept coming up later on, like our um we got our development deal with Mutiny Pictures, now Bayview Entertainment, through posting the trailer to Reddit. And then when we had the piracy leak, which we'll get to that, there was a whole discourse about it on Reddit, Twitter too, but like there was a whole thing about it on Reddit. So in weird ways, the movie keeps looping back to Reddit.
Mm.
Um, so anyways, um we got all our pre-production done because we had kid actors and only 7 days to film in my parents' house. We shot listed it, pre-planned for it, like we were like Apollo 11. Like we even had backups of, okay, so let's say one of the kid actors is sick and can't come, then here's our revised shot list where we just have one and everything else is implied. And then I even had a, let's say both the kid actors are sick, then here's how we shoot an entire movie without ever seeing them, and then getting them to do voice acting remotely, right? So we had planned. And because we did all that, because we didn't leave anything up to chance, the day of the first shoot, everything went off without a hitch, and we wrapped, I think, like 10 minutes early. So when we got to shooting, I was super nervous and also like tired, over caffeinated, and I had never worked with kid actors before. And I was like shaking a little bit. And then I said action. They just did the scene like basically flawlessly. And I said cut. And I said, oh, that was easy, right? And all this anxiety just melted away and we just shot the scenes. Um, so then the rest of the shoot went off fairly well. basically without issues. We were always a little bit behind, but not too much. We would usually make up for it at the end of the day, or like shots would get scrapped, other shots would be added, but we got everything that we wanted to get shot, and we got um almost all the dialogue that we wanted to get recorded, save for like a handful of things. Like there was originally a scene where um the actor Lucas, who plays Kevin, was supposed to quietly hum "You Are My Sunshine," and I hadn't taken to account, like, I just assumed everyone would know "You Are My Sunshine," but he didn't know the tune to "You Are My Sunshine," like, so he couldn't do it, and I'm like, oh, well, we can't teach him the song, right? So that scene was cut, but outside of that, everything I needed, I had. We wrapped. We all did. Well, me and Josh did a vodka shot. Jamie was doing some sort of California sober situation, so he didn't have a shot. Um, so we had a shot. Da da da. It's done. Then I went into post production. Shortly after we wrapped, my assistant director, Joshua Buckhalter, passed away. So that was tough. He wasn't just my assistant director, he was like a close friend of mine. So
Yeah.
it was difficult editing, because on top of just, oh, editing can be a challenge in itself, it's like it was just this constant reminder that your friend's not here, and he's like physically in like the footage too, right? Like I would, after we yelled cut, he would like come on screen and maybe move props around, and yeah. um so that aside, I got to work on editing took about 5 to 6 months. um because I really took my time and invested in it. Like I really wanted to get it right. I also enjoy editing, so there it felt like, oh, there's no rush. I can just do my favorite part of this whole process, which is editing and sound design. And then I had a rough cut. I had finished a roughish cut around the holidays, which was a terrible time to have a rough cut to send to people, because everyone was busy doing holiday stuff and like didn't exactly want to sit and provide notes. Also, it can be like pulling teeth getting people who've already read the script, know the movie in and out, to then watch a rough cut of it. Um, it's also hard too because it's horror, right? Like it's not like a comedy video where you can just watch it and say, oh, it's funny, not funny. Like for horror, most people want to turn off the lights, get the sound up, get the atmosphere ready so that they're not unfairly biasing the experience of watching it. Um, with that being said, we did have an associate producer, John Kmetch, who was in a perfect situation because he was a producer who had never read the script. So he was more or less going in blind outside of um, just he knew the synopsis, he knew the vague, like, just kind of story, but he didn't know the story, right? So he watched the first rough cut and provided excellent notes and feedback on everything. Um, and then I sent him a second rough cut. He came back with more notes, and he was even really good as far as some of his notes. He'd be like, "Okay, this is how I feel, but I'm not 100% on this point because I feel like I already know too much about the movie. So get a second or third opinion on this particular point. This is how I feel, but like don't like get a second opinion." He was awesome. So before I had completely finished the final cut, I cut a trailer for it and posted it in the filmmaker subreddit. And I had gotten an incredibly positive response just from the trailer, which is still the trailer we use to this day. Like outside of like I think I changed one or two shots, and maybe like obviously logos changed. Like now the trailer has Shutter IFC Midnight at the top, but like the dates are changed, certain things in the
Sure.
title, credit card. But like outside of that, it's the original trailer. Um, I posted it to the filmmaker subreddit. The response was incredibly positive. Jonathan Barkin at Mutiny Pictures contacted me and said they wanted to pick it up. Um, then there was other stuff too. Like I spoke to another like smaller distributor producer type who had some reasonable notes. Like he said maybe get the movie down to 100 minutes, which I did to the second.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like the movie's exactly 100 minutes. I think it's like technically an hour, 39 minutes and 59 seconds. And the reason for his suggestion was, okay, this is your first movie, a film festival, they're not necessarily going to take a 2 hour movie. If you're this is your first movie, they want to probably program a short film in the front. Also, maybe this movie could get it like take a haircut, which was totally the case. Like the movie was way too long. Some people still think it's too long, but anyways. So um he also had other suggestions which I won't get into because I thought they were terrible. Also, while he was watching it, because he texted me, okay, I'm watching it now. He was texting me while he was watching it. So,
He
like,
wasn't immersed. He wasn't in the
he
same
wasn't
space as
immersed.
a lot of.
He was like very much. I think the idea of the cigar chomping executive who says like that movie needs 20 minutes cut off and a different ending. And I'm not embellishing with the different ending thing. He literally had a like horrible suggestion for, oh, you should like go back for reshoots and change the ending. It was so bad. Anyways, I won't say his name though. Because he lives in Alberta. So then and it was just so disheartening hearing that too. Like the whole process, I was in my emotions about everything. Like it was dark. It was still kind of it was like the third wave after the summer where remember we had that summer where shots were in arms and it was like maybe this is over, right? And then we had that winter where it's like it's not quite over yet. Um but which actually that was kind of a good because then I didn't have to worry about going out. I could just edit, right? So I guess that wasn't the worst thing. But it was just all these things at once. Like I'm sending rough cuts to my friends who have read the script a bunch of times and like unsurprisingly don't want to watch a rough cut. But like I wasn't thinking that in the moment. I was just like, why aren't you watching the rough cut? I was upset because I'm still mourning the loss of my friend. Also, my friend helped me make the thing that I'm upset about, right? Like it was all these things. I'm sending that to produce like distributors, and one of them really likes it, the other one really doesn't, but I don't trust his judgment. Like it was just this whole mishmash to compound things. Like I have schizophrenia. So, like in general, I got voices in my head. So it was just this whole thing. Like I had multiple meltdowns over it. So finally, I had a close-ish final cut. I sent it to Jonathan at Mutiny Pictures, and he said, maybe there's parts in it that are a bit slow, but those parts are almost kind of hypnotic. I think you're basically done. I don't think you really need to change anything. I had also sent it to my friend Caleb, who was one of the crowdfunders, who he, just to provide like general lay person horror fan feedback, he watched it with his girlfriend. He and his girlfriend loved it, and they're like, oh, don't change a thing, maybe like this part, bring up the audio, we couldn't quite understand this part, like, but outside of that it's golden, don't change a thing. And it's interesting because Caleb, like, after the movie came out, he's like, so how different is the version that's in theaters from the version we saw? And I'm like, basically nothing's changed. You guys had like the most sneak of sneak previews imaginable, right? um so I had my final cut, sent it to Mutiny Pictures. Interestingly, I sent like the ProRes file and all the assets on a hard drive and mailed it to the tech person, Josh Doak, who's also one of the executive producers now, who's amazing, excellent tech person. I mailed it to him. He lives just outside of Nashville. And interestingly, the hard drive went through LAX to get to him through. So like our movie went to Hollywood. Haha. So then we submitted to a few festivals. I submitted to Fantasia out of my own pocket. Then Jonathan had sent it to a few other festivals as a distributor. I was just waiting for to hear back from these festivals. In the intervening time, I got a job doing data entry for minimum wage, which actually was not that bad of a job. Like it was minimum wage. I was in a windowless office, but I didn't mind it because like I didn't have to deal with people for the first time in my life, which yeah. So and it was also good once things started picking up for the movie. I was just working alone at my desk and I could like check Twitter and check my email. It was great. Um, so there was a period in June, maybe May, where I hadn't heard back from any of the film festivals. My and again, I was just still kind of in my emotions about everything, and I had this really horrible night where I thought maybe I failed, maybe the movie's terrible and everyone's just being nice. Like, like I miss Josh, and I had a big cry. I cry a lot, but like this movie, I've cried so much during the making of this movie. Some of those were happy tears, but I was crying, had this horrible night, fell asleep, woke up in the morning, checked my phone, got an email. Justine Smith at Fantasia International Film Festival had emailed me. I'm like, right? Because like getting into Fantasia for Canadian horror filmmakers is like getting into Cannes or Sundance, right? So look at the email. She's like, hi, I'm Justine. I programmed the underground portion of the Fantasia Film Festival. I was sent your movie by another programmer at the festival because she thought I would love it. She was 100% live. Right. Would you like us to include it for this year's Fantasia? I'm like, I could not respond sooner. I was like, absolutely. Oh my God. This is the best email I've gotten my entire life. Thank you so much, Justin. Absolutely. So then I went to work that morning and I called my parents and I'm like, Mom, I got into Fantasia. They're like, what's Fantasia? I'm like, Fantasia's like Sundance for weird movies, right? Like, so
That's so good.
yeah,
This is
because
the
like
biggest deal
fa-
ever. Yeah,
yeah, and she's like, what's that? Well, because like outside of a certain community, certain people don't know what Fantasia is, right? Like my DOP didn't know what Fantasia was.
right.
He was frustrating too, because he's kind of divorced of the horror film community. He's not like a huge horror person. So when I told him about Fantasia, he's like, what's Fantasia? And then when I told him about the Shutter deal, he's like, "What's Shutter?" I'm like, and then after the Fantasia screening, this YouTuber called Your Movie Sucks gave the movie a positive review. And he and Jamie was like, "Oh, Your Movie Sucks liked our movie. Oh my God. You hear about these things happen to others, but you don't think it's going to happen to you. Right." So,
It's so funny. That's
yeah.
great.
So, um, got into Fantasia. Me and Edmon went to Fantasia. We did it on the cheap. Like we took Swoop to Toronto and then took a bus from Toronto. Anyway, so Fantasia was a blast. Um, it was our first time seeing the movie on a big screen, and that's the only time I've sat through a theatrical screening of it. So they do tech check, like, do you like how loud the movie is? Do you like how the movie's displayed? I'm like, yeah, it's golden. So they play the movie. I watch the audience the whole time, and the audience is reacting how I want them to react, right? Like they're jumping at the right parts. They're clearly affected by it. So the end comes up, the house lights come up. There's this uncomfortable silence in the theater, followed by like exhausted clapping. Like the audience looked like they had been put through something. So Justine goes up on stage. Okay, we're gonna have a bathroom break, and then Kyle Overball is gonna come up, and we're gonna do a Q&A. I go to the bathroom. I come back. About 80% of the audience stays for the Q&A, which is quite a high ratio. Um, so I do the Q&A, blah blah blah. Come back home. Um, Jonathan Barkin contacts me and says, okay, so we've sent the movie to Shutter based on the first handful of positive reviews that came out of Fantasia. And they fell in love with it right away. They want to make it a Shutter original. I'm like, awesome, great. Yes, where do I sign? And that really felt like winning the lottery. Like, oh my God, Shutter wants to make it an original, right? Awesome.
Mm.
I had a meeting with Shutter. The meeting with Shutter went great. And they're like, okay, we're thinking Halloween 2023, the coveted Halloween release for Shutter. I'm like, oh, great. Awesome. Right. Yeah, that's great. That'll be great too, because I'll have this window where I'll be able to not worry about Skinamarink and I can focus on writing the next one. Right. So then we start playing some European festivals. We play one in Spain that had an online portion. I want to be clear. Uh, so the movie was pirated because it was on the online portion, and along with the entire other slate of movies. Like, I think there's this one trauma movie that got pirated too. It was horrible, right? And like all these other movies, they didn't have like a Shutter deal already signed out of the gate, right? So like I think it really hurt their productions. But regardless, um wasn't the film festival's fault. Great festival. If you want to ever submit your movie to a horror festival in Europe, definitely send it to Terra Molins. They're an amazing festival. Don't let this experience paint your idea of that particular film festival. So the way I found out about the piracy was I was on Twitter and I was egotistically searching Twitter for mentions of Skinamarink. And I saw this Twitter user whose only existence is to say, okay, these are the movies that you can steal today, had listed Skinamarink and also had listed all the other ones, like these names where I'm like, that also played at the Terra Molins Online Film Festival. There must have been a leak out of that, right? So I immediately emailed my distributor. My distributor immediately emailed the festival, and within, I think, less than 48 hours, the entire slate of online films were taken down. They issued a statement on the whole thing, including like, okay, if you bought like passes for the online festival, we'll issue you a refund. I felt so horrible for this film festival too, because they're not like Con or even like Sidges. They're like a kind of medium sized festival. And they'd spent like no one programs a year of like for a year programs all these movies with the hope, hey, I hope all these movies get pirated, right? Yeah, I so when I saw that, I was panicked and terrified because I thought, okay, what if Shutter rips up the contract based on this? Like, I don't know, right? Like, I don't know how these things work. And there was other things as far as like people in between me and Shutter were kind of doing uncomfortable things to talk out both sides of their mouth. Like, okay, I said, shouldn't we tell Shutter? Don't you think Shutter would like to know if Shutter Original was leaked? And they're like, oh, well, we don't need to bother them with this. And it's like, well, if it's not a big deal, why can't we tell them anyways? So I had a 3 week meltdown. And on top of that, too, the movie slowly went viral, right? So all these people were watching it online who didn't know that we had a Shutter deal, didn't know maybe that they were making a filmmaker in Edmonton panic, right? Like they just wanted to see a scary movie, right?
Right.
So, like, my people started sending me fan art on Twitter, which felt good, but it felt like I can't retweet this because if I retweet it, then more people are going to seek
Right.
out the movie,
You're not
right?
supposed
Like
to have
if
seen it. Yeah, exactly.
yeah, right. Like so it was this hard thing that I've never had to deal with before of people sending me love and me not being able to say thank you, right? Like it was this weird thing. But there was also like some people would shit on the movie and I'd be like, could you maybe kept that to yourself till the movie's actually out? Like it's one thing to watch a movie and say I love it because that in a way is kind of that is a way of like that is you could look at it as some form of paying for it, right? They're paying for it with some sort of praise. They're paying with it with what they think is helping promote the film, right? Because again, we hadn't announced the Shutter deal. They didn't know. They thought they were helping this young filmmaker get this movie out there, right? So 3 weeks goes by and I get an email from Jonathan Barkin and he says, okay, Shutter knows about the deal. Don't worry about it. They they're not gonna rip up the contract. Like just chill. And then Shutter sends me an email shortly after saying, hey, we know about the leak. Don't worry about it. We're going to have a meeting with you in a bit to talk about how we have to release it sooner, etc. So they bump up the release date from Halloween 2023 to January 13th, 2023. So, like, not even 2 weeks into the new year, right? And got to work doing everything fast, right? So we're gonna announce in Variety, blah blah blah, that we have the movie. They announce, and then the movie blows up again, right? So then I start getting all these follows on Twitter. They start scheduling press junket days for me where I do like 10 interviews a day through Zoom. They start sending screeners to film critics. They start scheduling critic screenings in major markets. So they had a New York film critic screening, a Los Angeles film critic screening. I start getting all this attention. Sean Ashmore follows me on Twitter. um, oh, I was like, oh my god, the cute boy looked in my direction, right? So Then the movie comes out, the reviews are fairly good. Audience reaction is polarized, but hey, I'll take it, right? Just like the Blair Witch Project, right?
Mhm.
Um, we we modeled our release off of the Terrifier 2 model. So before Terrifier 2, there was talk of the Paranormal Activity release model, which is 12 college towns, then 12 other college towns, then maybe you open wider or don't, right? Then Terrifier 2 had kind of um demonstrated this new model that we had kind of mimicked. So thank you, Terrifier 2, by the way.
What is
Um,
what is the model, if you don't mind explain kind of laying it out?
uh, you do, I think, okay. So, and again, I still don't know 100% how this all works, but I think the model is you open in 600, like 500 or 600 theaters. Um, Opening weekend, you only have a handful of screenings, and based on those, you either expand or contract, and you expand or contract at different theaters. And this particular model would never quite work 15 years ago when a lot of theaters were still film, right? But in the age of digital projection, it's easy to expand and contract based on demand. So we I think we started at 692 theaters. At our peak, it had expanded to 800. So this was super wide release in America. So all 50 states, art house release in Canada. So I think we played at our peak 10 screens in Canada, and then a handful in the UK, including the prestigious Prince Charles Theatre in London,
Wow.
and one or two in Australia, and then recently New Zealand, which symbolically I really wanted to get New Zealand because then we have the entire Shutter territory: Canada, America, United Kingdom, Australia, and Z. That's the Shutter territory. And I've also found out that Ireland, like the entire Ireland, is also a part of the Shutter territory, I believe. Yeah, but it's weird too because talking with like the CEO of Shutter is based in London, and then everyone else is basically in the United States, and the Americans, um, like they're, and to be fair to them, like it is kind of okay. You got Wales, that's a part of Britain, and then you have Scotland, which is not England, and then you have Northern Ireland, which is not a part of Britain, but it's a part of the UK. Like it can be confusing to an outsider, right? So, um, anyways, that was a whole word salad.
No,
So
that's really interesting. I think the and you guys just opened in Poland, right? And quite successful.
yeah, and that's separate of Shutter. So the
Yeah.
Polish distributor, completely separate of Shutter. And the reason we opened in like did our first big foreign release in Poland was because they were the first one to ask. I think even before the Shutter announcement was known, this great distributor in Poland named Velvet Spoon, who is also the distributor of Mandy. And when I saw that, I'm like, sold, right?
Yeah, right.
Um, yeah, reached out to us and we're like, yeah, absolutely, right. And then we have our Mexican release, I think, in March, and then France. And it's interesting too, different countries they rebrand it, right? So in Mexico it's Skinamarink Evil Awakens, and in France it's The House or La Maison, and then parentheses Skinamarink, right?
Right.
And like in Mexico they made a whole new poster. In France they kept the poster but changed the name. It's interesting, right? So the movie releases to pretty good fanfare. We surpass a million, which doesn't sound like a ton when you're comparing it to a Marvel movie, but for this kind of movie, that's huge, right?
Awesome.
Yeah, we've since surpassed 2 million. We're now for domestic gross, not international, but for domestic gross, we are the top IFC midnight release ever. We surpassed the Babadook for domestic gross, not international. International for them is bigger, but that felt like a huge achievement, right? Because I thought like, oh my God, we beat like a movie I like and I saw in the theater when it came out, right? Like that felt like a huge honor, right? So then the people at Shutter, and by the way, at this point I had done like 50 interviews, like Esquire, all these people. It was I felt like a celebrity. They're like,
You
we
are.
want to, well, but yeah. So um they they said, okay, we want to fly you out to Los Angeles for a screening here to coincide with the Shutter release date of February 2nd. And I'm like, that's awesome. I don't have a passport. And they're like, okay, let's get that done. So like they're like, okay, we'll book everything. If you can't get your passport renewed in time, like then like don't feel bad, we'll do it all so that it can be refunded. We'll still have the event and maybe you can do a Zoom Q&A, right? But we want to get you down here. So I go to get my passport renewed, and this was all, I was all under the assumption of, remember like months ago there was all this in the news like passports were taking forever, and now because of that they streamlined everything, threw a bunch of money at it, so now that like you can get it renewed really fast, right? They even changed rules, like previously you couldn't use an expired passport to get renewed, but now you can, right? And I had an expired one, so it was great. So I went to get it renewed, and I went to the office and I showed them like all my documents, my expired passport, and also IFC had printed off a letter of here's why he needs to travel to the States, blah, blah, blah. And so the guy's looking over at the federal agent, and he's like, are you the Skinamarink guy? Is this the move? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, hey, this is this is the Skinamarink guy. Like, nice.
That's awesome.
And they're like, okay, yeah, we'll get you in, we're not going to bump you in line. And I'm like, good, I don't want special treatment, but we will get you in. You have all the documents anyways, we'll get you your passport. Got my passport, flew out of the country for the first time, cried on the plane, landed in LA. I went through the Jackie Brown hallway at LAX and the power ran out and I screamed. Got to my hotel, but it was like, oh cool, the Jackie Brown, what's going on? Is this an earthquake? Is this what happens during an earthquake? Right? Like I never left Canada before.
Wow.
I get to LA, go to my hotel room, they're like, hey, Patton Oswalt's gonna do the Q&A. I'm like, Patton fucking Oswalt? Like I love Patton Oswalt. Like I used to be able to quote his like comedy albums for I'm such a nerd, verbatim. um we have the screening. It's like the best night of my life. They redid this ornate movie palace to look like, they changed all the light bulbs to blue. They set up, recreated the living room from the movie in the theater so people could get pictures in the Skinamarink living room. It was insane. Barbara Crampton was there, Chaz Bono was there. People from the consulate came. My country came to recognize me. They had all these photographers. Like that's really when I felt like a celebrity, was that whole screening. Met Patton Oswalt, he was great. Da, da, da. They screened the movie. Q&A ends. All these people line up in the what's it called?
In the lobby for you? For
No, not the in the theater between the seats. The part in the theater in between the seats. I can't believe I can't think
seats
of
in the
it.
screen.
I don't know. So all these people line up to get my autograph and pictures with me. Someone brought a Fisher Price phone for me to sign.
Amazing.
Which some of the actors on the movie have said people have done that with them too. They brought their Fisher Price phone to
Right.
sign. So I do that. Then they kick us out into the lobby. I sign more autographs. It's insane. Oh, it was amazing. I've never felt uh yes. So that's my experience up until now.
Incredible. Well, you've come a long ways, and obviously, a $15,000 to over $2 million project is a huge financial success, but it's also this amazing artistic journey that you took from, YouTube experimental YouTube videos to, premieres in premieres in LA
In LA.
and streaming around the world. So I want to go back a little bit and have you talk about a couple of things you mentioned. One was
Yeah.
this liminal space and analog horror, and how these kind of somewhat niche uh, or very niche, depending on how you look at it, subreddits and YouTube styles. What is it about that space that interested you as an artist and intrigued you and made you start playing around in there?
So it all started with in film school, there was this YouTube series called Marble Hornets, which was the original Slender Man mythos.
Okay.
And from there, analog horror on YouTube had grown so much. Now there's this really creepy thing called the Mandela effect. Check it out. It's insane. And the TikToks based on the Mandela effect are nightmare fuel. But I had gotten interested in all these art styles like so many other people. And I thought, okay, I could put this into a movie, right? Like, this is so uncanny and creepy. And also, more importantly, feels when you look at some of these images, you feel like you know them. You feel personal. You feel like it's about you, right? Which is really the power of these art styles. And I thought I could do a movie like this where the viewer will watch and it'll feel like it's made for them, right? And they can take away their own thing from it, right? It's something about an image that's not so clean and maybe a little bit mundane, right? And I did a movie like that, and now I've seen there's this filmmaker in America, this kid, he did this really amazing short film based on something called the back rooms, which is this other liminal space online thing. And it was announced recently that he, and I think he's not even 18 yet, he got a deal with A24 to turn it into a feature. So like, wow, good for him, right?
And you never know how these things influence each other, but your
Mm-hmm.
Skinamarink was mentioned in those releases as like as the success of Skinamarink.
Yeah.
It's so fascinating how these things all kind of a bunch of things happen over a long period of time, and then they all happen at once, right? So talk a little bit about Backrooms. Sorry.
Yeah. So this, I only know the broad strokes, but this kid using, I think, just like software anyone can get, so maybe Blender and all this other digital compositing stuff, had done this um uh short film based on just the single image that got shared around a bunch, called The Back Rooms. And I think the idea is, in video games, you can go into certain parts of the world and they're called the back rooms, right? And the your imagination can grow wild with that. Like, maybe these rooms go on forever. What's in the back rooms, right? And then this short had gone viral, and then based on that, he, behind the scenes, I think, was approached by producers, and then that led to an A24 thing. Um, so yeah, I don't know if I have any more information to give outside of that. Yeah.
No, I just think it's fascinating that and the potential that your film influenced the pickup of this other success story, online success story in the space,
Mhm.
crossing over into uh mainstream niche horror.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, I
fantastic.
do think so. Even before my movie came out, there was so much buzz around that guy's short that maybe it was just a coincidence,
Right.
right? So maybe it was just kind of two things happening at the same time, right? So
Sure. And
mm,
and you mentioned Sedensburg, Emily Best, their CEO or founder, uh, great supporter of indie filmmakers, and they once came here and gave, I think they gave in both Edmonton and Calgary, kind of
mhm.
like on board. So I just want to shout them out again because they are quite amazing in terms of curating a platform that is around supporting the artist, not necessarily the financial component for themselves, the back end of the
Yeah,
company.
they really are great, and they even do like they have a whole video lesson thing that you have to watch before you do your crowd fund, and they bring up really smart things like even explaining the difference between target audience and target demographic and how certain age range, certain gender, they're not all going to watch the same movie, right? What's more important is target audience. So
That's very cool. And who ended up helping you, or who were your biggest supporters in that crowdfund kind of era? Because you were, now it's a big success and it's easy, kind of easy
mhm.
to look back and be like, well, you know, well, we just kind of flowed through. But that
Yeah,
was months and months of not having funding of like basically
yeah,
$500 grant, which is nothing, and then you had to kind of carve out a space with you and Edmon, and how did who was your supporters, I guess, of
oh
that
yeah.
crowdfund?
So like a lot of these things, it was all my friends and families, right? So I tried to crowdfund some through my YouTube channel, but and I did get a few donations from that, but really it was all my friends and family and the community around me and the community in Alberta. So people like Edmon Rotea, my friend Anthony, all my filmmaker friends, people like Ava Kavernen, who's a filmmaker here. Um, like a third of our graduating film class had donated, right? So really, um, you even though it was there was three guys shooting in a house, not a lot of cast. It looks like so few people were involved, but really there was a whole community around us. And that's the success story of films like this is the community. No one makes a movie by themselves at the end of the day, even if they're the only one shooting in a room or editing in a room. You need a community to do stuff like that.
Amazing. And what are some ways that could potentially make your life could have made your life easier at that time in terms of tools, grants, supports, things to help you? You applied for grants, but you didn't receive the grants.
Mm,
Some of the some of those met or things that support systems that could have either helped you in the past or potentially could help the next Kyle Edward Ball, who's currently running around Edmonton or Calgary or Red Deer or Grand Prairie, trying
yeah.
to play with their idea and make it work. What in your opinion, what are some things that could help foster that?
I think it's been very interesting since the movie came out. Um, Keep Alberta Rolling and Edmonton Screen Industry offices have been very vocal supporters of the film. And oddly enough, we didn't apply for an Edmonton Screen Industries grant. We did get one during distribution. So we had applied for a grant to cover some of our Fantasia costs after the fact, which they were more than happy to do. And interestingly, so Keep Alberta Rolling has been great. Edmonton Screen Industries have been great. The grants we applied for, which were like one of them was even film specific, haven't said anything about, or maybe they have, I don't know, but they haven't been as vocal as these smaller not for profits like Keep Alberta Rolling. And if you look at what um successes related to Keep Alberta Rolling and Edmonton Screen Industries, is I feel that they're more connected with things on the ground. And I feel like some of these larger organizations that give out grants, they seem so detached, and it seems like they aren't willing to take a chance on a weird film, a really weird film, not a just, oh, this is a little quirky, but a really weird, different film. And that's indie film to a T, right? Like that's what changes things, right? That's how indie films break through, right? Movies like Clerks, even movies like Night of the Living Dead, like that was a super low budget nothing movie that made it big, right? So I would say, if I was to change things, like made King for a Day for the grant process, I would say I think it would be in their best interest if they took more chances on weird movies and were a little bit less conservative with who they check marked and didn't, because there are a lot of great films that do get grants, but a lot of them do seem very safe, right? And I think it would be better if organizations were more willing to take a gamble. And I've also seen through a lot of these grants, it's a lot of the same people getting it over and over again. And it seems like they're less willing to take a chance on someone who hasn't isn't as established, right? So, yeah, that's what I would say. I think for grants, even if they have less money, I would say take more risks, right? What is filmmaking but a giant risk? So,
Yeah, I mean, things are weird until they're not, right? Like they're
yeah,
things are niche until they're not, and so so that kind of years that you spent experimenting with this style has kind of compacted and then exploded in this success story. But even if they had given you kind of a little bit of help along the way, that potentially could have made life a little easier on you. That
yeah.
you wouldn't have, maybe some of those breakdowns helped you artistically, but it'd be nice if you could avoid if we could
Yeah,
avoid
and
them.
like it's hard when you're coming from an environment like YouTube where before the movie blew up, like people go to my YouTube channel now and it's like something like 26,000 subscribers. Before, while I was making Skinamarink, I had maybe 1,400. I had a very small community of subscribers um who really liked my stuff, but I didn't it didn't feel like I had a huge community around me. And then when we went to crowdfund, it was so nice because it felt like those grant denials felt like the door being slammed in my face again. And then when I went to crowdfund, it felt like doors being opened, which felt so good, right? So I know people who sit on boards for grant applications. I know their dream isn't, hey, I can't wait to break some filmmakers' dreams, but it can feel like doors slamming in your face. And it's frustrating when you see other people who are making much safer content, who've been given grants before, get the door opened for them again and again. So that would be my thing. Take more chances on weird films and take more chances on filmmakers who don't necessarily have that impressive of a background. And you look at something too, like a lot of people who I see getting grants, like, didn't grow up in houses like the one you see in Skinamarink, right? Like a lot of them come from maybe more privileged backgrounds, and I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say that. Like, yeah, like sometimes it hurts, and it feels like, geez, another door being slammed in my face because I did a weird movie, right? And not something safe that looks good on paper and will get a lot of prestige and maybe play in some nice festivals, and everyone's going to forget about as soon as they step out of the theater, right? So
Yeah,
yeah.
this one it's causing insomnia. It never leaves.
Yeah.
That's the thing about it. But I think what has happened kind of naturally and through the osmosis and power of the internet is that you find your people and you find your audience, and that
Yeah.
the beautiful part of these niches, horror is just one of them, but it's a very powerful one in that if you have a great concept, then people are, you don't need to be deeply tied to uh too many people in Alberta to find the people around the world, this global audience that can lift you up and help you, and
Yeah.
certainly found that in Shutter, and the amazing experiences that you've had. Is what's next for you? What's next on the docket? And I'm sure that's a thing that you're asked all the time. So
Yeah. Yeah. So I had some ideas. I was telling people in interviews similar to this, early on, what the ideas were, and of course I fell out of love with those. So all I know is I will be doing a second feature at some point, hopefully sooner than later. I just need to focus in on it and write it. It's definitely going to be horror. It's definitely going to be weird. And it's definitely going to be some form of lo-fi. I don't want to do anything too clean. I like grainy. I like hiss and hum on the audio track. It might be a different kind of lo-fi. But yeah. But I don't know what it's going to look like quite yet.
awesome. And what is there anything else that you want to share with our audiences, mostly people who support the Alberta film industry and Albertans? So is there anything that you would like to get out about yourself and about your career to kind of cap it off?
I don't know. I will say one cool thing about just coming back to keep Alberta rolling. It was so beautifully serendipitous that Shutter by accident had picked the release date for January 13th, which coincided with the Last of Us release. So, like, keep Alberta like, all of a sudden it was like Christmas, right? Like, it
Yeah.
was two like complete opposite ends, right? Like this giant budget thing and this little movie that punched through at the same time. It was awesome. Yeah.
It was Alberta Film Christmas. That
Yeah, yeah. Just by accident, right? Like,
exactly.
you know.
No, it's awesome. So I guess I'll end it there. Check out where can they check you out on Twitter and on YouTube?
Yeah, yeah. So my YouTube is just bite-sized nightmares, all one word. My Twitter is just Kyle Edward Ball, all one word. You can see Skinamarink on video demand and Shutter in all Shutter territories. And it's still actually playing a handful of theaters too, which is insane, even though it's out on Shutter already, which is awesome.